I'm Garrett McQueen.
I'm Scott Blankenship.
And this is TRILLOQUY, True and Real Stories from the Fringes of Classical Music. I want to give a quick shout out to James Napoli, who was just taking a few photos of this session. He actually took the photos that you'll see at trilloquy.org. Scott, you looking real cool on your motorcycle.
You think so?
Yeah, I think so.
See, because I think that people my age and up are looking at that and going, "Oh, give me a break."
Why would you say that? What do you? Because anybody who rides a motorcycle is cool, and I don't really know about different sorts of, because you don't have a Harley, right? So I'm sure the Harley people.
Thanks for blowing my cover there. Appreciate that.
Well, they can look at the picture and see that it's not a Harley.
Okay.
All right, but okay, we'll continue that later because I see I'm making you upset. So
yeah, I'm so upset.
So today is a very special opus of TRILLOQUY. We have our guest Vanessa Rose live here with us. We'll get talking with her here shortly. But by the time this airs, Scott, we'll have gone to the fair. And I want to know what you're looking forward to as far as going to the fair, because I know you don't really like a whole bunch of people and a whole bunch of crowds.
No, I have no idea what I'm looking forward to. No, see, the last time I went in the evening. Uh-huh. And when I left, I had spent $100. I wasn't drunk, and I didn't have a new tattoo. So I thought something was wrong.
So one of those things needed to have happened.
Something.
But were you at least really full?
I don't remember.
Oh, well, I'll take care of you.
I went on a few rides. It was a few rides.
I'm not doing that.
I saw the, you don't like the carny rides?
No.
There's the possibility that something will fall off while you're in there. I mean, there's a dangerous element to these rides.
Well, TRILLOQUY is such an important project. I want to live to see it go as far as I can. And a part of me living as long as I can is not getting on those rides.
So you're going to keep me off the slingshot?
You can get on the slingshot if you want to. I'll take all the pictures you want. And, so anyway, Vanessa Rose is here. We're going to talk about the American Composers Forum and one of the initiatives that they have coming up involving diversity and inclusion and all that sort of thing. And, these initiatives are it seems like a trend that a lot of organizations are really having the conversations of inclusion and diversity. Even us here at American Public Media, we've been doing a lot of that. But I wanted to go back to something Jessica Majunkin said in the last opus of TRILLOQUY. For anyone who missed that opus, Jessica is one of Beyonce's hand-selected violinists, performed the Coachella performance, went on her latest tour, and she said that Jessica said that she's been involved with all of these different initiatives and programs over the years as far as diversity and inclusion, but none of them felt more culturally fulfilling than performing with Beyonce, with all of the blackness that is, and really exploring the many shades of black culture and black music. What do you think that means? I mean, are organizations that are predominantly white, are they just wasting their time by doing these doing these initiatives and trying to get all this going?
I wonder, but first, before we get down into that, I want to admit something about Homecoming.
Okay, about the Beyonce documentary.
Yeah, I felt jealous to a degree.
Talk to me more about that.
I don't know of anything in white culture that I came up against that is, it seems to be as tightly woven, as proud and as invested as all of these people. Maybe envy is a better word.
Sure.
I envied the work that it took to put it together and to have all of that precision. I envy the shared history that everybody seems to be completely steeped in. I mean, to me,
despite the different backgrounds of people, whether you're a dancer, a violinist, a marching band person, a singer, And
I just thought that was really a proud moment for everybody to be involved, and it made me envious that I thought, man, the only thing that I can even compare it to is when I was doing theater with Shelter Belt Theater.
Yeah.
And we did do plenty of productions that incorporated other cultures, races, sexualities. We did. Are you familiar with the play Corpus Christi?
I don't think so, no.
That was written in 1997, and basically it tells the story of Jesus Christ and all of his disciples as if they were all gay men. And so
I'm interested.
We were picketed for that. There were people out in front that, I had to shove my way through to get into my own theater to see this show. There was the dance element. There was, essentially the message was love, and being who you are. We also did I can't remember the title, but it was essentially a more modern Raisin in the Sun.
Mm-hmm. I do know that one.
Okay, so we did a play where there was a tenant building, and you got to see 3 different phases. You got to see when it was freshly built and a white family in the 50s were living there. And then the next part of the play was a black family living in there as it was run down.
Yeah.
And then you got to see the third act where it was being gentrified. And all of the actors were in all 3 different scenes, but as different roles, So, and that was really neat. And of course, we tackled something, I guess, which was more mainstream in a play called Love is Strange, about a woman in an abusive marriage. It was my ex-girlfriend, actually, who was the lead role, the woman in the play. And it was difficult for me to watch, not just because, that was my girlfriend at the time being treated this way, but just biting, watching the controlling and violent nature of some of these relationships.
It's really interesting how perspective really plays into all of art and how it's perceived. I think this is a good place for us to invite Vanessa Rose to pop into the conversation. Thanks so much for being with us here today.
Hey,
Hi,
Vanessa.
thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
But before we hear about more, I want to hear about more of your background and what led you to your position at the American Composers Forum. But toss your hat into kind of what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. When Scott mentioned envy over Beyonce's Homecoming and that joint experience and that joint culture, do you think that exists in classical or instrumental music or whatever you want to call this music that we're dedicated to?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I was going to bring up Homecoming because
please do. Yeah.
How can we not?
Yeah. Shout out to Beyonce. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. That's a great question. I think that actually taps into one of the more uncomfortable aspects of the conversation that we're having about what it is to talk about diversity for a white-centric classical music, Western European classical music organization. And I think one of the things we were talking about earlier even was, we talk about, we need to be more diverse. We have to have people of color. We have to have women. And what we're not saying is white women, or we're kind of framing it in ways that kind of still make it the other,
right?
Instead of saying we're just going to play white people music today, right? We're gonna own that shared background that we have, or the shared passion we have for Western European men that lived 200 years ago. We don't say that, right? We don't articulate it that way. So in that way, I think we cannot have an experience like that. For me, from my perspective, Homecoming is symbolic and not symbolic. It's important in so many ways. The least of which is that the experience that different people can tap into that I envy as well. Mm-hmm. Also, I think it's really remarkable to me that it's not just a show. There's so much thought. There's so much meaning into who's playing the bands that were chosen, right? You've talked about that. The way in which it's presented, as we see in the Homecoming, the whole show, right? Not just the performance, like what it takes. Sorry, hit the microphone.
No worries.
What it takes. I'm using my hands. I'm so passionate about this. What it takes to put something like that on. And it is so important, and it is so meaningful and significant to so many people, including me, who has very different background and connection to music. And haven't listened to Beyonce for a long time. It's she's still a relatively new artist for me.
Yeah.
it's striking, it's compelling, it's relevant. It has so many different aspects because of the context that it's being presented in, and because of how much is behind the decisions that were put into play. And how hard she worked on it, right?
Yeah.
This you want to talk about like excellence. I'm really looking to disrupt our definition of that in the classical music world. And to me, I love this term. Poet Douglas Kearney, who teaches here at the U, we were talking about this, and he said models of rigor, right?
Okay, I'm gonna write that down.
So it's not that moving away from excellence means that we're going to pander to people, or we're going to diminish our quality or our desire for the discipline it requires to play the music that we play or sing or perform in different ways. It's the model rigor. Mm-hmm. It's intentionality. It's still just incredible hard work. Right?
Oh, yeah, of course. And I'm sure, you can speak a lot to hard works with your being, I'll say, Queen Bee of the American Composers Forum.
I like that.
So why don't you tell us about your musical upbringing and what led you to your position at ACF?
Sure. So I am the complete product of Western European classical music. Both my parents are classical pianists.
Oh, wow.
Yep. I grew up in the concert hall, literally, running around while my parents were rehearsing or playing or whatever. My mother is focused on the forte piano, so the Mozart era, also as a musicologist as well as performer. And my father is focused on the Romantic era, so he plays Schumann and Brahms and Beethoven. That's his specialty. So that's my upbringing. I'm also very much European descendant, directly first, second, and third generation European descendant. So I'm all of those things that we're talking about. And while I'm the only one of my four siblings that went into music professionally, obviously that was our home. That's what we were brought up in. Sunday morning was my religion was playing duets with my dad, or just being told to practice, or whatever it might be. They did not say we had to go into classical music. They just wanted us to appreciate it.
Yeah.
And I honestly had a very complicated relationship for a long time with it for that reason, because it was something my parents wanted me to do. It wasn't really a personal connection until I started playing orchestra.
Okay.
And I started going off to music festivals, and it became something I was doing together with my peers. And that's what made it so powerful for me. And ultimately why I decided to go into it. And I did the conservatory track, and I thought I had three options as a musician. I was going to either, teach or be a soloist, or be an orchestra. Chamber music, maybe, but that didn't seem viable either. Orchestra is what I loved, so that's what I pursued. So
and what instrument, sorry?
Sorry, violin.
Okay, yeah.
Yep, I'm a violinist. And I think this is important for me because I was the good kid that did what I was supposed to do, and I practiced, and I was going to, I did what everybody told me to do to be a classical musician and to try and succeed. And I kept my blinders on. I wasn't, the person in school. I took some classes here and there. I kind of been interested in contemporary music, but really I felt like I have to practice so that I can do really well in my jury, and I can go out and get an orchestra job, and that's going to be my career, and kind of ignored all these other interests I had too, because I had to practice,
Yeah.
And so I did that for a while. I was in New York and freelancing, and it was an injury that actually led me to start doing some internships and explore administration and realize, I really love doing this. I really love being behind the scenes, creating and cultivating opportunities for artists. I think my skill sets fit better with that, and I never really enjoyed the spotlight anyway.
Okay.
I much prefer being kind of the person, in behind the scenes, creating opportunities, and then letting those that do this much better than I do, thrive and excel. So that's kind of my pathway into administration. But I have to say, it's actually when I worked for theater. Interesting that you're talking about that. That I had a real aha moment, because I'd been working in mostly orchestras. I also worked at the Metropolitan Opera. So, as Western European classical traditional structures you can get, these organizations I had experienced, learned a lot. I mean, I am grateful for that. But it was going into theater and working for a playwright lab called The Lark in New York City, where not only did I step outside of music entirely and realize just how insular the industry overall is, I also was working with an institution that was very focused on the underrepresented stories. How can we use theater to share people's stories with those that will never experience it, will maybe even never meet anybody that's experienced that?
Right.
And And that's the first time within an institutional setting anyway, talked about, unconscious bias and, we talked about gender identity and, all of these terms I had never been exposed to before. I mean, this is my own ignorance, obviously, as well. So that was remarkable for me. And funny enough, that experience working with playwrights and people that were creating these stories, and it was all about incubation, this organization. Yeah. That's what led me to connect more with composers and connect more with contemporary music. So after that, I went and worked at International Contemporary Ensemble. And
the good sort of ICE.
The ICE, yeah, right. And also American Composer Orchestra. Now I've kind of cultivated this career over the last decade, working with artist collectives that were primarily working with composers in the creation of new music. So that's kind of my entry into the American Composers Forum, where I've been since January.
Can we jump in there and just can you lay out what American Composers Forum does? Because I'm sure that I'm not the only one that is just now learning about this.
Oh, and we're just a few blocks away. So so it was started in the 70s, 1973, by two composers, Libby Larson and Stephen Paulus, who were University of Minnesota students.
Yeah, cool. Shout out to both of them. Great music. Yeah.
And Libby still lives here in the Twin Cities, and she's amazing. Unfortunately, we lost Stephen a few years ago. But it was started as the Minnesota Composers Forum, basically a collective of composers who were playing each other's music. And quickly that also led to recording the music. And to this day, we have Innova record label as part of the ACF. In the 90s, it expanded to become a national organization, the American Composers Forum. And ultimately what we do is we support the individual composers, the creative process. We give fellowships, direct artist support, fellowships, residencies, development grants. We also are a membership organization, so it's about community and connecting composers with each other, professional development opportunities, mentorship. We also have a number of education programs, for example, a high school composer program called Next Notes, where the budding composers or creative artists of high school age all come together here to the Twin Cities and have mentorship and have professional musicians work on the music and record it for them. So we have our fingers in a lot of different aspects of what it is to be a composer, what it is to want a career as a composer, and also work with a composer, whether you're in middle school. We have a program that works with middle school bands and choruses, or as a high school composer, or as a member of a public that wants to connect with a living creator of music.
When you talk about the insular nature of so much of these things, I had heard of the American Composers Forum only because of the Composer's Date book. So so for people, for people who listen to classical music regularly, you may be familiar with the This Day in Music History sort of special, and it always closes with brought to you by the American Composers Forum, reminding you that all music was once new.
Yes.
And actually, the Composer's Date book is really what helped me fuel, my values and my energy as far as what I wanted to do in classical radio. So when I would check the Composer's Date book website every day to see if there was a black composer or a woman composer or someone whose birthday it was that day or something significant, and that's how I would shape many of my shows at my former station. And so in that way, the American Composers Forum has been really beneficial to me, but I don't know if it has broader appeal. I mean, has ACF played a role in your life or in your career at all?
Sorry. No, it hasn't.
Well, we're here today.
Yeah, right. But no, I'm not a composer. Yeah. And the station that I came from, we didn't have the technology to get anything that American Public Media was putting out. We were this tiny little station, skeleton crew. And Minnesota Public Radio and American Public Media, we just knew them as the people who were winning all the awards at the conferences.
Oh, okay.
We were just it cemented this idea in my head that you will not compete with Minnesota Public Radio. You are going to get trounced no matter what you do. And now look at me.
Beyonce wrote a line about that at some point. I'll think of it here later.
Okay.
But when it comes to, the name even, American Composers Forum, one of the early conversations we had is about how that can be a little exclusive,
Mm-hmm.
or all the way down to the word composer.
Yep.
What are some of your thoughts on
Yep.
on that conversation?
Yeah, well, that's a conversation we're having. In the spirit of thinking about associations and how one may perceive composer as a term. Often we find it's still very much associated with a white European man that lived 200 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, though. It's twofold because we have also on our board artists who have shared with me, they're not Western European-based artists. They're like we have a Chinese pipa player, Gao Hong, who just joined our board. And they felt they never identified as a composer, and it was because they were awarded something through the American Composers Forum and given this kind of recognition that they felt it very valuable and enjoyed being recognized by an institution like ACF as a composer, and that meant a lot. On the other hand, though, we are also hearing from a lot of people that they don't think it's a place for them because they don't necessarily see themselves as the composer in the Western European classical music sense, right? But we've, especially in the last decade, have really tried to expand who we serve and who is a member and who the programs are for.
Yeah.
That said, I think we could do a lot more, and I know that we could do a lot more. And what's in a name? That's one descriptor. It's one aspect in which people make an assumption about us, or might have heard about us, and maybe not more than that. So I think it does matter. Yeah.
How do you break out of that, seeing as how composer has been designated to a certain thing? I mean, when I think of composers, though, Duke Ellington, it doesn't always get that moniker,
Right.
But more current, like I think that Stevie Wonder could probably get that.
Absolutely,
Tom
yeah.
York
Sure.
from Radiohead.
Yeah,
Even my favorite, Tom Waits, I would say, is a composer. So how do we bust out of that? How do we bust out of that mold?
And I'll just offer an example as well. I met Ben Romain, a contemporary composer, once upon a time, and he tells a story about how he met Lady Gaga once, and she described herself as a composer.
Full stop.
Yeah.
I'd say so too.
Yeah.
Well, it goes back to how do you self-identify, right? I mean, I think that's what we're learning a lot in this work is, there's so many labels that we attach to things using genre and things like that are just so systemic to our ongoing status quo and not really evolving as organizations that are at least historically based in Western European classical music. So I take a lot of cues actually from the AACM, the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians, based in Chicago in the 60s. They started in the 60s. They still exist, and they're coming. We're bringing them here actually to the Twin Cities. Please come September 6th, Friday, September 6th. We're co-presenting. If I could do a little plug really quickly.
Please, yeah. And we're going to get into it, yeah.
Okay, cool. They are coming and playing at the Cedar, 7:30 p.m., Friday, September 6th. It's a co-presentation from the Cedar, ACF, and the Schubert Club. And it's the Great Black Music Ensemble, which is their ensemble in residence at the AACM. But to answer your question, George Lewis wrote this comprehensive book about the history of the AACM. And it turns out that they recorded a lot of their early conversations when they were first gathering, which is remarkable. So it's almost transcripts even that he's just drawing from and putting to compile the history of this organization. And they talk a lot about composer, original music, creative music. They specifically chose not to include race in their name. And they specifically chose creative musicians because they wanted to be inclusive of those that were creating original music or just performing it. Not everybody was actually, seeing themselves as a creator. And so I think a lot about what does that mean to that. So I actually, whenever I now write or talk about American Composers Forum, I try to not exclusively use composer. I try to say composers and musical creators or creative artists, creative musicians. We've talked about this too. I don't know what the right term is. Maybe it just means adding a few terms to express, all are welcome. I guess that's always the challenge when you're trying to be inclusive. You're excluding, right? So we just kind of keep adding different language in an effort to be more inclusive. But I think it's I'm not saying we're changing our name right now.
Okay,
For anybody worried, but it's very much a conversation.
I was waiting on the big reveal for the new name.
No, but I think it's important to have the conversation, to ask the questions, and then maybe we decide it's it's a huge thing to change your name. Would people get confused, or would they just write us off? Who knows? But
it really is. We get so hung up on names, don't we?
Yeah, we really do.
Because with the way that things are on the landscape now, you see so many artists that have their hands in almost every part of the process. We've obviously been talking about Beyonce, but Garrett, you've met my friend Scott.
My favorite composer, I guess we can say now.
Yeah, but you've met my friend Scott Working.
Yeah,
and he's involved in theater, and he's got his hand in every. I mean, do we move over to our tour? As a term, is that too hoity-toity?
Well, and here's the other thing. We can't be all things to all people, right? And we've done a lot of New Music USA, for example, is another organization focused on the creative process of living music for primarily Western European classical music, but not only. They're based in New York, and they were a merger of Meet the Composer and American Music Center in I think 2011. So, they're kind of the most comparable organization. And what does that mean? What are they doing? And how can we complement each other or collaborate with each other? And then there's so many other organizations, even talking about the Larkin Theater, that are about the incubation and the support of the creative artist. So I think there are a lot of different, very interesting things happening, not to mention, social impact and social justice. And this great organization also here, Springboard for the Arts. So I'm still in my first year. So for me, this is a lot of information gathering. This forum we're having is also very much a part of that, to really identify where can we have a meaningful role that's really going to help these conversations along in a number of different organizations and circles. And ask some of those important questions.
Yeah, and let's go ahead and talk about that forum a little bit. So, you already mentioned the performance that's happening on September 6th. But, there are many events happening surrounding this convening, including a panel of composers. I'm going to be on this panel where we, just sort of discuss what we need to discuss as far as inclusion and equity and all these racial conversations as it applies to composers. What are you hoping to get out of this panel discussion? Do you have any hard set goals that you're shooting for? Right.
So let me offer a little more context to help answer that question. So this convening actually was already in play when I started my job in January. We got some funding from the Knight Foundation, thankfully, and really trying to figure out, so what does this mean for us?
Yeah.
Because there are so many conversations happening, as we know. I will say a few things. I think one of the reasons this came to be was we were seeing a lot of these conversations happening at various conferences and various convenings, and rarely including composers, or at least not directly.
Yeah.
And to me, if we're talking about how an organization, a musical organization can be relevant, can be connected to their community, can be forward-looking, how can you not include a composer? How can you not include a living creator of music in that conversation? And so, and if we're about American Composers Forum, we are about American composers. However we define that, right?
Yeah.
How we see that, it's still a pluralistic community of different voices. And so this is absolutely essential to our own existence as an organization to be relevant to that conversation. So we thought that having the platform of musical creators, who, by the way, are also not isolated to one genre or one ensemble size. Composers don't just write for orchestra. Hopefully. Hopefully they're influenced by many things. And, all bring their own backgrounds and cultural influences into that music making. So that was one reason we thought we could gather kind of across different pockets of our field in a shared conversation about this. And also having the musical creators or composers, see, I'm going to have to use multiple terms gladly, to have them lead the conversation. Because again, here we are often talking about, well, orchestra should do this, but not necessarily having the very people who should be the center of the conversation, leading the conversation, even in the conversation. So what I love most about my work is the conversations I have with these artists and the ideas they have, not only for, what they want to write on the page, but the experience I want to create. This is a shared experience. It's not a one-sided presentation. At least it shouldn't be, in my view. So I'm really excited about having some assumptions questioned. I really want to have these panels. My target audience is the institutions or the people in positions of power to curate or program artistic presentations. So whether it's from an orchestra, or whether it's from a presenter series, or a smaller group that's thinking about their season next year, that are having these questions and conversations, but just they're not sure what's next, or maybe feel stuck, or maybe they're having a lot of pushback from different stakeholders. Who knows? I think there's a lot to be gained from having this particular collection of people, because we have people in various roles, also part of these panel conversations, to get to that next conversation of how. Like, hopefully the why is already evident, although that's definitely something we need to be
and you can't always assume that.
You can't always assume. But what I see often in these conversations is we kind of stay up here, and then people leave and aren't sure what to do with that information. And I think we need to do both. I think there's still so much work to be done. I'm still learning so much about the why and the how and the assumptions I've made and the privilege I've had. And what do we do tomorrow? And what do we do in the next year? We've been working with a consultant, Justin Lang.
Yeah, shout out to Justin.
Yes, shout out to Justin, absolutely, who's been just amazing. Highly recommend. Who's really, and one of the reasons I was eager to work with him was because I knew he'd be honest with me. He wasn't going to give us a formula like, you do this and you'll be great. He's really been helpful in us having some really uncomfortable, difficult conversations and recognizing our own
like what
historical exclusion. Well, I think another thing I've seen often is that we can talk about this, but we're not looking inside our own organizations. Who's the leadership? Who's making the decisions? What is the language we're using? Who's at the table? So we have to acknowledge that we are historically white. And while we've made efforts in the last decade to expand what American Composers Forum is and who it's for, we have a lot of work to do still in that respect. And if you look at our staff, for example, they're all amazing people. And I among them am
amazing.
And white. Thank you, Garrett. But we are all white except for one part-time person. So that's something we have to reconcile. We have to reckon with that. And what does that mean? And what are the steps we can take? I'm not going to fire anybody. They're all amazing. So what are the things that we can do to really make sure that there's better representation, not only in an advisory role, but in a decision-making role? Our board is much better, but we still have work to do there. And I think we'll see a total evolution in the artists. All artists that we seek to include and support and advocate on behalf of as a result of the people that are in those decision-making roles.
Yeah.
I have to ask the question, have you gotten any pushback as a result of the makeup that you just described? Because I'm sure that you've read that article by Nabal Masood about it's time to let classical music die. Isn't that the exact title of it?
I think
He's written a series.
Yes, yeah.
And there was another one that deals with colonization a little bit more directly.
Yes.
Have you received any pushback, like people saying you're positioning yourself to be driving a conversation where other people should be? Absolutely.
How
so?
Well, look, I'm a white person. We are a largely white organization, having a conversation about racial diversity. I think it's really important to acknowledge that we are not leading these conversations, that we are by no means an example. We are in the work as well. What I hope happens is that, one, as somebody who is, already established, somebody that comes from the very traditional classical music world and background and tunnel vision, I've done a lot of learning and have so much more. It's like the more you know you don't know, right? That's just the tip of the iceberg. And so I have to make myself vulnerable and acknowledge that and acknowledge the privilege I've had. And I hope encourage others to do the same. I hope also that we are going through this process. We can actively cultivate connections to others that are in this process as well, so we can do more together. We're having all these conversations kind of by ourselves, I think, and to acknowledge the challenge, the discomfort, the difficulty of doing this work so that we can really do it and do it well is necessary, and not just kind of do what's necessary for the grant or whatever, and speak to the
and yes,
whatever.
And I don't want to gloss over that, because so many organizations will have these conversations when it's time for them to get a grant or when there's some money involved. But it's actually, as you said, cultivating those authentic connections.
Yeah.
That whole conversation makes me think of the concert that happened maybe working on a year ago now, featuring the work of Pavielle French.
Shout out to Pavielle French.
Shout out to her. She's going to be on this panel.
She is,
I understand. Yeah. Scott, you've heard her live.
Oh my gosh! When she sings, the hair on the back of my neck stands up.
Absolutely.
I mean, she's just so good.
And when she was featured at the Ordway, I believe, here in St. Paul.
Yep.
Not only, was the music different, not only was the feeling different, but the crowd itself was, the whole experience felt so different because of that one bit of inclusion or diversity. And I hate to boil it down to that, because, her music and her work is so much, it's not in service to diversity. It's in service to her expression and, and all that sort of thing. But even so, having that, having her in that setting just made the concert hall experience feel so different. Were you
totally
at that
agree.
concert?
I was there too, and this is one of my favorite stories. And I'm so glad that she's agreed to participate with us. She's been amazing. And actually, that commission with the SPCO was supported by a development grant from ACF.
Oh well, shout out to y'all.
Yeah, thank you. Very proud. I mean, this is what we do it for. And that to me is the greatest fulfillment, is to sit in that audience and know that, like, this is what it's for. This is why we do what we do. Because I think what's interesting about that example too, and if you don't know Pavielle, you should know her.
Yeah.
She's this amazing artist, and she's an amazing person. And I think that was so compelling. The music was amazing. She was also herself on stage. Clearly,
no code
she had
switching.
never. Yeah, she had never. First of all, she had contacted SPCO. There's a TPT, Minnesota.
Twin Cities
Public
Television.
It's a Minnesota original. Anyway, it's on our social media. We'll share that. But yes, she reached out to St. Paul Chamber Orchestra. So she reached out to them and said, I want to write for orchestra. I want to write for my hometown orchestra. She's from the Rondo neighborhood in St. Paul. I'd never written for orchestra before. And they said, let's talk. So that's, shout out to the SPCO for that too.
Yeah.
And so they not only invested in this relationship, but the whole context. It's what I really think it goes to context. The people that were in the audience, the way it was presented. I had an opportunity to talk about it. She was able to share who she was as a person, connect with the audience in meaningful ways, even before she started singing, which was incredible, right? Now the question is, what's next, right? I don't want that to be one-off. I don't think anybody that was there that night wants it to be one-off. And she's just an artist I have a lot of time for. I really believe in, and I would love any opportunity to create more opportunities for her.
Yeah, we got to get Pavielle on TRILLOQUY.
Hey, Pavielle, do you want to come on TRILLOQUY?
We'll get that worked out.
Hey, Pavielle.
But Vanessa, you brought up social media, and Scott, I don't know why I just can't stay out of trouble on social media. But so the American Composers Forum Twitter account, sort of put information out about this convening and everything that was happening. And the first response under it was from a woman. I think I'll put her in the description or something. I can't remember her name right now, but she's from Canada, and she was talking about how, why is there only one woman on this panel? Should it, is the topic of diversity and inclusion not also a topic of gender? And because I, was added in the original tweet, I felt like I needed to respond. And what I felt like I had to speak to and what sort of the conversation began to happen, maybe not so friendly at some points, was the fact that when it comes to Black equity exclusively, or racial equity, it always has to be pinned to another sort of initiative. We Black folks, we can't focus on what's going to make us better, what the path toward our liberation, without also talking about gender equity and that sort of thing. And obviously, I think gender equity is very important. I've dedicated much of my career to making sure that we also showcase music by not just women of color, but women, period. But with all that being said, I feel like sometimes we have to sit back and allow ourselves to focus on an issue that is a problem without having to tack it on to something else. I mean, do you have an opinion on that whole? What would be your response to the person saying, "Well, why aren't there more women on this panel?"
Yeah. Well, first, I have to say, I think she's kind of right. We should have had more women.
Sure.
We do have more women on other panels that day, which are, this is all connected, I think. They're not isolated conversations. But yeah, we should have had a better ratio of gender representation, as well as different roles and different, so many other things that we want to include. The way that we're approaching this, and again, this is one day that I hope is one of many days that we can help to facilitate, is that racial equity as a focus does include women, does include
exactly right.
LGBTQ.
That was my other point. Right.
It does include socioeconomic status. It does include age. We've also tried to pay attention to those different inequities within the racial conversation in this one day.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that there are many people certainly that I wish I could have included, and there are certainly a lot of different viewpoints that I wasn't able to include in this one day. As it is, the panels I think are a little big, but we really wanted to make sure we had multiple different viewpoints, because the thing is, there's not going to be one answer to any of these questions either, right? I think it's interesting in thinking about how you identify new voices, or even just back to the women conversation. Some women wanted to be identified and recognized, the lack of women representation. Others would really just prefer to be called a composer and not have it named in the way. I think we need to do both.
Sure.
But I think, I think we are talking about gender equity by talking about racial equity, because women are included in that framework. Also, what we have really talked a lot about at ACF in our conversations, again with Justin, thank you, Justin, is the idea of intersectionality, and that if we are talking about people of color, which of course that in itself is a problem, because that's the other, and it lumps a lot of different people in one group, which is completely unfair. But if we're taking that as one framework and making women and gender equity a different framework, then we're really not identifying the fact that Black women or other women of color are not part of that original racial equity. And the fact is, the more that we can understand the systemic issues that we continue to perpetuate in our institutions and society, the more we think about, biases and prejudice and historic exclusions, and really work towards equity, the fairer our entire system becomes.
Yeah.
And it's not just for one body, right? It's about how do we make it fair for everybody? Everybody in the end benefits. It will be harder for some that have benefited from this system over others, sure.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean we're picking one as, we're not switching power. As you talked about the difference between equality and equity, which I think is still it deserves repeating, I think.
Right.
That's something we've been trying to understand. It's the overrepresentation of white people. It's not that we're looking to exclude white people, white men, white women from ACF and all the things that we're working on. It's that we are recognizing they have benefited more than others.
I think that's beautifully said. And just to cover myself a little bit, I don't want to make it, again, I don't want to make it sound like that I don't think gender equity is an important conversation, because it is. But Vanessa, as you said, the conversation of racial equity includes women of color. It includes queer women and queer men. I just hate the idea that a focus on a conversation surrounding racial equity has to be pinned to something else or is considered incomplete if it doesn't include X, Y, and Z. And I think, Scott, we've talked about this before, where my identity intersects. I'm a part of the queer community as well as a member of the Black community. But that doesn't mean that I have to, focus my work on queer equity all the time, because I'm also Black. And when I focus on Black equity, I'm also including queer people of color. I just, I hate the idea that anything racially centered or even Black centered is incomplete. I hate the idea that, an organization isn't allowed to really tackle that issue as it is. And before I pass the mic over to you, Scott, we've brought up Justin Lang a couple times. I have a Justin Lang story.
Oh.
So this was a couple years ago at the Sphinx conference, and he was on a panel, and a woman from I need to think of this organization. What's the organization that oversees like the large orchestras?
The League of American Orchestras?
Oh, shoot. There's one. There's ROPA, and then there's...
Oh, ICSOM.
ICSOM, yeah. So the chair of ICSOM at the time, during, at the point of the question and answer portion of the panel, decided to walk to the front and skip everyone to just give her 2 cents as ICSOM president or whatever. And Justin Lang, in front of the whole crowd, called her out, saying that you are... this is an example of your privilege. You think you can just come up here and skip everyone and blah, blah. Anyway, so that's when I became a Justin Lang fan, because, and I wish more of us would, have the courage to really call out those sorts of inequities as they happen, because that's how they're always perpetuated, And I know that can be a challenge. Scott, you talk about it all the time, even with your family. So, and I'm not talking bad about your family either, but I'm saying, it can be a challenge to deal with some of these conversations in real time, as they're happening.
Absolutely, because, people love to come out and say how they think they would react in a certain situation. And then when it actually comes down to it, it doesn't happen that way, that you demur, or even worse, you have a fear response where everything shuts down and you can't even engage anymore. Let's take a moment and put you on the spot. This panel is coming up when?
This panel is on Saturday, right? Yeah. So, at the time of this airing, day after tomorrow. Okay.
So how do you think the panel shapes up as far, is it, let's ask you as a participant, is it representative of everybody that needs to be included in the conversation?
For this conversation, what I appreciate, Vanessa, about this panel is how the big diversity aspect are the backgrounds of the people involved. So there are composers, big C composers on this panel. There are also folks like Pavel French who, we may not always consider a composer, but create this really beautiful music. And then I'm here. I'm not so much of a composer. I'll write a jingle here every now and again. But my main thing, these days is radio and how I can support composers and these conversations through my job. So, while there's always more work to be done, and quickly back to that panel that I was talking about that Justin Lang was on. Yeah. One of the first questions asked on that panel was, why are there not more women on this panel? So. Again, it's always important conversations, but I'm really happy that we're getting so many different viewpoints within the industry. And I know that, as we already laid out at the beginning of our conversation, the work that the American Composers Forum does may not directly touch everyone or may not, be directly relevant to everyone, but through the different bodies on that panel and that will be involved in this convening, those connections can be made.
Mm-hmm.
So, what I learn on this panel and what I learn from this convening, I can convey to a listener. And that's how it's manifested.
Okay.
Or a composer can do it through his music. Shout out to Jonathan Bailey Holland, who's going to be on that panel. He does a lot of that already. So, that's what I'm looking forward to, and I think it'll be a success. I mean, the conversations we've had leading up to this have definitely been very exploratory and very enlightening.
Can I ask a simple sounding question leading up here?
Yeah.
Because, you talk about your role here at American Public Media. You are the one Black person on the air.
Sure.
There's people who have identified you as the first Black national classical broadcaster, right? Okay.
I hope they pick a good headshot for the history books.
Okay. So now, and Vanessa, maybe you can answer this too, because whenever we have had a position open here, we don't get a lot of people of color applying. In fact, in the 13 years that I've been here, I have seen one other Black person apply for a job here. So is the way that your organization looks and the way that these panels look, can it be boiled down to who's available? Can it be boiled down to the people who are showing interest to participate? Can it be that simple?
So I think that's a great. You're looking at me, so I'm going to jump in, and
please.
I want to hear what you say too. I think that it's not separate from the conversation about how do you identify artists, and how are you identifying new voices to be part of your program. And I think, if you do a call for scores, well, nobody applied, or there weren't enough, whatever. There are a lot of reasons, and I think that goes back to the context and the framework, and everything from who is participating in the creation of the language, the construct of the program, or the job description, the job itself. What kind of leadership opportunities are there in the job? Is it being paid equitably?
Yeah,
that's hard. I don't know why that's hard today. Anyway, there are just so many. And then once you attract somebody, what is your experience inside the organization?
Right.
Are you being tokenized? Is it a good experience? Are people learning? Are they open? Are they seeking other voices? So it's not just you having to teach everybody. I mean, that's how I at least, that's what I tell myself as a white leader, that I hope I'm at least creating an environment where people feel that they are, it's fair. It's a fair space for them, and they are empowered, and they are participants not only because we need to make it look good, but because we really, really need and value diverse perspectives.
That has to be a tough tightrope to walk, to gauge merit versus background and all of these other parts that are folded into
well,
it.
There's always been this misconception, whether it's hiring musicians for an orchestra or whatever, that a focus on racial equity and maybe even gender equity might threaten quality.
Yes.
And I have a big problem with that because, for whatever legal reasons or whatever, you can't say only Black folks apply, But there is this fear that if you go out and look for, if you use more diverse hiring practices, that maybe they won't know as much, or and that boils straight down to racism, America's original sin. But basically, all I'll tack on to what you say is that. As long as the relationship is authentic. I don't feel tokenized here at American Public Media because, and shout out to Julie Amacher, the conversations I have with my manager are very much based in, well, what is your opinion on this? What is your perspective on this? What are you interested in bringing to the table? And I feel like I can bring what I want to bring to the table in a way that white folks can understand, and they can get down with my perspective, and we can all learn, and that at the end of the day, it just makes all of this so much more inclusive and so much more valuable and so much more relevant. So I'm hoping that we can put another crack in that wall in that piece of glass at this convening for the American Composers Forum. Vanessa, we really appreciate your spending the time with us here. Before we let you go, can you talk to us a little bit about how people can learn more about the ACF, if they want to contact you and all that sort of stuff?
Great. So our website is composersforum.org, and we are on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter as well. On our website, on the homepage, you will see a link for the Racial Equity and Inclusion Forum taking place in the Twin Cities. It will be live streamed. It's Saturday, September 7, 8:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Central Time. And I'm really hopeful that this is the start of more conversations that we can help facilitate. And for me, I'm listening as much as everybody else to look for the opportunities for us to have a meaningful role in what it means for us moving forward to really advocate for living musical creators of today.
Yeah.
Before I go, I wanted to say how amazing this podcast is. I have learned so much. And as I've shared with both of you, the dialogue between the two of you, I think, is just modeling behavior of how we can have these conversations. It's not about shaming, but it's about being vulnerable, about being honest and authentic, as you said. And I know I'm still learning so much as I practice this conversation. And I'm so grateful to have TRILLOQUY as a podcast every week to listen to and learn from. So thank you.
Thanks so much. You hear that? No one is shaming you, Scott, okay? Don't make me pull my soundbite in here, my favorite soundbite.
I got a soundbite for you.
Anyway, thank you so much, Vanessa.
Thank you.
So on the next opus of TRILLOQUY, Scott, I interview a creator, but maybe not the sort of creator you would expect. So her name is Cameron, and she wrote a book about how to take care of your new instrument. So I thought it would be cool to have sort of a back-to-school opus of TRILLOQUY where we hear what Cameron has to say about, her relationship with teaching kids, and she managed to do all of this. I think she's like 19 years old right now, so she's doing incredible things. We're actually APM is actually featuring her book for the September edition of Classical Kids Storytime.
That's what I was going to say. We have to give a shout out to Classical Kids Storytime, which if you have some young kids in your life, you should check it out because it takes. The whole series takes fables and fairy tales and recasts them in a modern way, puts some classical music behind it with some original illustrations by Nancy Carlson. And I think that your contribution, along with Cameron, is the one thing that's been missing up to this point, talking directly about...
Because where do all those fables come from? What are the traditions behind all of those stories that have been showcased in the past, most of them anyway, Western, European, blah, 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 right?
Well, that's
so and Cameron.
Man, you're going to call me out on that.
Cameron is of color, so it's I when I saw her give the presentation of this book and pitch for funding for it and all that, I knew, oh wow, I have to make sure that this young black woman and her work is showcased on Classical Kids Storytime. So,
and you got to do the read, right?
And I got to do the voice acting. I hope I did okay. If you're listening to this right now, it's available. So if you go to yourclassical.org, you can find Kinderlute under Classical Kids Storytime. Anyway, I'll be chatting with her on the next opus of TRILLOQUY. Scott, you and I are going to talk about another book. So a lot of reading to do. So I hope you'll join us for that.
It's coming up next time on TRILLOQUY.